Hello there and welcome to another one of my vlogs. If you're new to the channel, welcome along. I'm Mick Howard, I'm a landscape photographer from the UK and it's great to have you pop by. Please do check out my other videos if you've got time, that'll be really grateful. It's been a while since I've done a vlog actually, and the last one, if you've not seen it, was about springtime, so please do go check that out, and indeed check out any of my other videos if you haven't seen them. I particularly like the Dolomites one, so go check that out. In terms of what I've been getting up to, I haven't been doing that much photography lately, but I have just bought myself a new DJI Mini 3. Woo! So I'll be trying this little thing out and hopefully getting some good footage from that. Probably just in time for my trip across Europe later in the summer. This vlog is totally different and I'm going to be covering a different genre of photography. For those of you who didn't know, I'm an ex-military photographer, and from 2003 I applied to be a photographer in the British Army. I did so and I passed the course quite well. There was 12 people on my selection course and only 2 got through, and thankfully I was one of those lucky people, and I have to say it was definitely one of the best times in my life in terms of job satisfaction, and I had all the kit at my disposal to use, and in that sense I was very lucky. I began in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. I spent 4 years there and then I moved to London as the Royal photographer covering ceremonial things in London. So that was very interesting too. I've also travelled quite widely across the world, taking photographs of the British Army on operations and indeed training. I suppose the other thing to say is that after I went to London, I did do, well, I visited Afghanistan on 2 occasions, once as a cameraman and once I went out there and took some stills as well. Anybody who tells you that it's not hairy or scary out there is totally lying. It is quite intense. I spent some time, I'll pop up some photographs for you now. This was in Kajaki with the parachute regiment. I spent a good few weeks up there on a big operation, so that was good. And moving on from there, I left the army in 2013, and subsequently my oldest daughter asked if she could interview me for her final project for a uni degree. I agreed, and I got some other people to help her along. She spoke to them, set up interviews with them too, and the resultant video, what you're going to see now, is that video that she put together. I think it's a fantastic piece and just gives you a really good insight into photography in the British Army really. So let's go take a look at it. From the boots on the ground to the things that make the army tick.
You don't think about the actuality of what's going on in front of you. All you're looking at is the pictures.
You don't have a gun aimed at the enemy all the time. You have a camera. Well, the armies are, in effect, it's a community, and that community has lots of different jobs. So amongst that, there are also photographers and cameramen.
When you're an army photographer, you carry a camera, but you're also armed. On operations in Afghanistan or in Northern Ireland, for example, the role of the combat camera team is to gather footage as it's happening on the battlefield and give people a real perspective back home of what is happening.
A lot of material and footage that people at home see, whether it's on the front page of a newspaper or on the news, is stuff that we shot.
Then that's great, and that's a really important role because that's current and that's current news. But I think ultimately the archival use of the pictures will prove to be far greater.
Every single image, every single minute and second of footage, regardless of whether it was sent to the media or not, is archived at the Imperial War Museum. And it means in 50 years' time, 100 years' time, our material can be viewed, and the operation, the war, the conflict, can be judged in part by the material that we've produced.
You know, we've all seen pictures from World War One and World War Two, and every conflict and every major news incident that takes place. We look back at these pictures and it's photographs that you see and you remember.
My career with the Army Film Unit goes back to the last course to be trained at Pinewood Studios in 1945. The photographers of today, they are of a very different calibre to those of my day. And they were all photographers rather than soldiers. Now I think they've got to be as much soldiers as photographers. These guys have to be properly trained as serving personnel, because they aren't all going to be on a camp somewhere, tucked away, taking a few happy snaps.
As an army photographer, you know what's safe, what's not safe. You know the procedures of the guys. You know exactly what they're going to do. You know what the orders are. So I think you're in a better place than a civilian photographer. Being with the guys, embedded with the guys, you can really get some great footage because they trust you, because you're in the forces. They open up to you, I think, a little bit better than what they would with civilians.
I think the difference is that as an army photographer, to a point, it's a lot of the back end stuff, the logistics is taken care of for you. You're booked on a flight. You get kit and equipment issued to you. You get taken to the airport. You get on a plane. You're taken to Afghanistan or you're taken to Iraq. You're given accommodation. You know, all of these things are taken care of, so that the concern, the worry, and the logistics that you would have to do as a civilian photographer, that's all taken away from you, so you don't feel that added pressure.
You know, we carry a weapon and we are integrated into a military unit, and we know if something should happen to us, you know, if we're injured, we know we're going to be evacuated the same way as any other soldier.
At the bottom of it, they are trained, serving soldiers, and that is an essential before you even start taking pictures. Our protection was a tin hat, and we had a camera and the clothes we stood up in. If you go and see the army photographers of today, they've got body protection, body armour. Oh, and the full-blown equipment today is not light.
I think you need to be quite physically fit and determined, and it does get difficult to work in uncomfortable conditions with all that kit and equipment, so you have to be fairly robust physically for that.
As a photographer, as a cameraman, you have to have something else. Although you are armed, your main weapon, I suppose, is your camera.
You've got to see that split-second thing that's going to happen, what could happen, and that's the key to being a good photographer. Being able to see that and capture it in a split second is important.
You've got to have a real passion for it, because when times get hard and you're in a firefight, you've got to be able to carry on taking those pictures and still think about the composition and the focus and exposure and everything else.
And you're always chasing after the pictures, and if it's cold and it's wet, then so what? All you can do is like protect your kit so you're still working, and that becomes your focus.
You're always after the front page picture, really. You're always chasing an image that's going to be remembered.
You could be in the middle of Iraq or Afghanistan, you could be in the middle of Cyprus, you could be in the middle of an exercise and it's a similar thing, you've been photographing all day, but you've still got to keep an eye out for that one picture when it comes, you know, and when you do, you get a massive sense of satisfaction from that, just professionally as a photographer.
You know, some guys I work with produce fantastic stuff. You know, some of the photographers, the quality of the work is outstanding. It really is outstanding, you know, and it has to be, because it has to compete with the industry, and we have to be able to get our pictures and footage out there, so it has to compete.
Not just a straight record shot of something that's taken place, but obviously you want to try and turn it into a really powerful, strong photograph, you know, with great composition and a strong subject, you know, in timing, you know, just to bring everything together to make a really strong picture.
There are lots of civilians and people in the army that don't know who we are and that we exist. And I think a lot of that is because we're very, very good at promoting the army. We're not very good at promoting ourselves.
But that's kind of not important, really, because the important thing is that people see the pictures you take, because those pictures are of guys on deployment or guys on exercise. They're the important ones. We're just the window through which people see them. That's what I think, anyway.
2-0. Ready?
If our material is being used in the news and our images are being used on the front page of newspapers and people don't know that we exist, well, maybe that's a good thing, because if that material is standing up amongst all the others and people can't distinguish between the two, then, you know, I think that's a good thing.
I was recommended to apply for a trade test in photography, and they said you've got to go to Pinewood Studios, of all places. In the headquarters at Pinewood Studios, we were trained either to be cinephotographers or still photographers. But recruitment into the Army Film and Photographic Unit didn't start until October 1941. But Churchill saw the need to publicise the activity of the forces. So suddenly we were in the advancing situation, and of course the pictures which were documented were then sent back as quickly as possible to the UK, and the pictures which were shown in the newspapers all helped to boost the morale of the people in this country, the people who were in the front line of the Blitz and so forth. Never mind propaganda, that the first element was far more important. The word propaganda didn't enter into the training of our photographers. It was really a case of a photographer such as me going along and taking photographs of what there was there to be seen, without any preconception of how the pictures could be used and should be used.
Things were kicking off in the Middle East and in Iraq in particular. And I was part of the first team to go out there, really. I was amongst the first guys to the big sand berm going across the border.
Last two there. Sorted, Seb.
Let's go.
Thank you.
The tension in the air was just electric. You could feel that something was about to happen. You know, my stomach was churning like mad because I didn't know what to expect. The Royal Engineers called forward what's called a combat engineering tractor, which started to carve its way through this big sand barrier. And I was filming this, thinking how significant, you know, this was. This was it. This was the first breach into Iraq, the first part of this war where British troops were actually going in through the border. And so I'm running around filming, you know, all of this happening, and then suddenly we could hear above our heads some loud explosions. And I'm looking through the viewfinder. I didn't really know what it was, but I couldn't see anything in front of me, so I just carried on filming. And then another explosion a bit closer, and one of the soldiers, the infantry soldiers on the berm, turns round and he says,
"Oh, airburst, get in the wagon!"
I filmed them coming off the berm with a sense of urgency. They got their kit off, they got into the back of this armoured vehicle, and I filmed the door close. And I'm still stood outside, you know, and they're inside. And I was like, and that's when it dawned on me, I better take cover here. But it was just one of those moments. There I was filming it, and I felt myself a little bit detached because I was looking through the viewfinder. And it wasn't until the door closed that's when it hit me. And I thought, right, I better take cover here. The rest of the morning I spent filming British tanks moving in to Iraq. And what we did with that footage, we edited it very, very quickly there and then and transmitted it back for the world to see. And it was shown internationally on probably every news channel you can think of. So that was quite a proud moment for me.
I was posted to my first posting as a photographer, which was in Aldergrove in Northern Ireland. I got there in 2001. Later on in 2005, I was out on the ground in an area in North Belfast called Ardoyne. I was with a team of 2 other photographers, and I was with a reporter called Simon Taylor. There's an area called the Ardoyne Shopfronts, but in that particular area of Ardoyne, it's split between Catholics and Protestants, so it is a hotspot for trouble, and you could almost feel it in the air that there was going to be trouble. So as the parade approached the shop fronts, one side of the road was the Catholics and on the other side was the Protestants. The actual people who were marching, the Protestants, were quite aggressive, and you did get a feeling that things were going to escalate and just get worse. They started hurling things in our general direction, and the Catholics were actually preparing petrol bombs and blast bombs. So we knew things were going to really start to escalate then. I had been in the area when a petrol bomb had been thrown, but luckily it didn't ignite, but I could smell the petrol and could see it on my shirt. I started to get a bit nervous then, to the point where I couldn't actually get my compact flash card into my camera when I changed my card. I think it's a mixture of adrenaline and obviously fear, because things were really starting to get out of hand then. 10 to 15 minutes later, it was then I heard a loud explosion and everybody crouched down. The Catholics were throwing blast bombs. So I continued taking photographs, because that's what you do. And one thing that is quite obvious when you're a photographer is your eye is to the viewfinder on the camera, so you've got very tunnel vision, so you've got to be really aware of what's going on around you, because you can get seriously injured if you're not paying full attention as to what is happening in your general area at the time. Another device landed to my left, and I jumped down between the 2 concrete blocks because I knew it was going to be a blast bomb. And when that detonated, the sound was so loud, and I knew it was really, really close, because my teeth actually chattered with the shockwave from the blast. And I thought that stage, that was too close. Within a split second, I could hear loud screaming. It was almost like, well, it was like a horrifying, deep scream. Simon was on the ground, clutching the back of his leg, so I knew he had been hit by the shrapnel from the explosion. But I continued taking photographs. I think it's just, for me, it was just instinct just to do that. It was just part of my probably training and things. Everyone reacts different to a shocking event, so I just continued taking photographs.
I deployed to Afghanistan as part of a pulse team, which is essentially a very short trip to Afghanistan. It was about a month long, and we went across there to basically look at as many stories as we could within the time that we had. So it's very fast, very furious. So we went out on a short patrol with some of the guys that were there, the infantry guys, and we left the patrol base, and within 400 or 500 metres of walking out of this patrol base, all hell broke loose and we started being shot at. So we immediately sort of reacted to that, or the guys did. And as a photographer, it's strange, because you spend your whole life in the army learning how to react in that environment. And there's certain drills and procedures that you do when you're being shot at. But you've got to try and curb those drills and procedures and start and take pictures, because that's what you're there for. Because if you don't do that, you just become a hindrance. So you've got to try and strike this balance between the things that you have to do as a soldier, but still get the pictures. And that's the challenge. And it was quite a frenzied time, quite a crazy time. And to be honest, you don't even realise that it's taken place. You're not conscious of the fact that it was someone's shooting at you, because you're focused so much on trying to get pictures, good pictures. It becomes peripheral. And it's only at the end of it, when you get through it all, as we did, and got this little house, you're sitting down there and you're sweating buckets, and your heart's racing and you're buzzing, and you think, Jesus, that was quite close. But you're still working, because the guys are sitting down relaxing, they're taking the helmets off, they're drinking water, so they're doing the thing that they do straight after being shot at. But that's key pictures as well, because you want to get that. So you find yourself sort of just continuing to work all the time. So it's quite a difficult environment to work in, challenging physically and mentally as well, because you don't really get the chance to process what's happened, because you're always looking at other people processing what's happened. So it's quite a hard sort of environment to work in from that point of view, I think.
We were taking over from the Americans so they could progress on to Baghdad. So we waited by the side of the roads, all the soldiers I was with and my team. So we stood there and I see this guy walking down the centre of the road in between all the British vehicles and American vehicles, and he's wearing a Iraqi uniform and he's carrying 2 big bags. And I think, this guy's an Iraqi soldier, you know, and he's brave, he's walking in amongst, you know, all these British and American troops. So I get my camera ready, I'm going to film. Hopefully the British or Americans will challenge him and stop him and arrest him. And they don't stop him. And he carries on walking. And at this point I realise if he's got these 2 big bags and there are explosives in there, he's going to take out these 2 top commanders. This can't happen. So I had to make a decision. So I put the camera down, I get my pistol out, and I challenge him and I stop him. And I force him onto the ground, and he had this big smile on his face. I'll never forget, you know, I think he was actually quite pleased to be taken prisoner, if that makes sense. And there was nothing in his bags apart from clothes. His intention was to give himself up. And I'll never forget that smile. It was just really bizarre. And that's the thing, war is full of surreal moments.
I was lucky enough to be employed as the staff photographer at Horse Guards Parade in London, which is probably, in my opinion, one of the best photography portions in the British Army. I was doing the run-up to the Queen's birthday parade, and obviously during that parade the guys with the tunics from the Coldstream Guards line up along the route. What they do before that is they rehearse, and they do this in Windsor Great Park. A woman just appeared from nowhere with a shotgun and decided to walk straight between the ranks of the guys who were rehearsing. It was just... And I actually got a letter from the MOD main building, said it was refreshing to see such a funny photograph when at the time the troops were heavily involved in fighting in Afghanistan. So.
North-south running canal and road from checkpoint 7. How copy?
I'm quite sure that the skills which they had acquired in the army and engaged will be continued into civilian life.
You know, you come away as a far more confident person. You can walk into a room with 1 person in or 500, and if you've got to take their picture, then you can get their attention and control them to a point. So you have confidence to deal with any numbers of people in various situations. You have a certain amount of level-headedness.
I can go into any situation in my current workplace and I don't flap about it. You know, the stress can be piled on. I just don't really feel it anymore. You know, I take it in my stride. Stress is when you're in Iraq or Afghanistan. I've done that. You know, this is different.
During my 11 years in the army photography trade, I've had a fantastic time, really. In the main, I'd say 90% of the time was awesome.
The fact is that you're in a job where you're taking pictures of, at times, some of the key moments in history, and to be part of that and have the responsibility of doing that and to try and do it well, was a great challenge and a great experience.
It certainly has given me a unique perspective on life. I value life more than I ever did. There are lots of people I know who sadly, you know, haven't made it and who were killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I think about them constantly. And I always spend a bit of time during Remembrance Day to remember them, as you do. But I made a lot of good friends in the military.
I had a wonderful experience and wonderful time. I wanted to be in the Air Force when I was called up, but I went into the Army instead, and I decided that I would go in and make the best